Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome to the Auckland Unitarian Church, a place that has been home to people like us for 116 years. Unlike many other churches, we don't have a creed. Instead, we have principles of how we should act together. They're up there on the wall, and I'd like to concentrate today on the third and the fourth principles. The third one is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And the next one is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So I'll be focusing on that in some of the hymns and in the sermon. And we hope that you will share some of these goals and that we may share some of yours. We especially welcome visitors. We hope you will join us in a cup of tea or coffee afterwards. Welcome. For our opening words, I've chosen some words that Jesus said, and it's a story about a dishonest man. And the surprise about this story is that the Master commends this dishonest man. Very unusual attitude, and there's a message in there, but it's quite hard to dig out what it is. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said, "What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." Then the manager thought to himself, "What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do. When I am dismissed by manager, people may welcome me into their homes." So he summoned his master's debtors one by one and said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. So the manager said to him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and let's make it 50. Then he asked another debtor, "How much do you owe to my master?" And the debtor replied, 100 containers of wheat. So the manager said to him, "Take your bill and make it 80. And the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. We relight this candle that we lit last Sunday and share the inspiration that we have received since then. Well, my topic today is sometimes it pays to have a plan B. I picked that theme a couple of months ago because my lawyer in a High Court case had a deadline of last Friday to make submissions on the next steps in our campaign. And I figured that she would either make that deadline, in which case I could tell you the good news about our case, or maybe she would not make that deadline and we would have to be thinking about plan B. Well, she did get back to us, but she still hasn't got the final word, and we're still waiting until next week sometime for what our opponent, the Attorney General, is going to do. So that was bad news, but not a disaster, because we already had a plan B. Now, some of you will know what our plan A is, because I've spoken about it before, but I'll just recap it. My colleague Tanya, Jacob and I are members of the Secular Education Network, and we have been working since 2014 to get the law changed. We want to do two things. We want to stop Christian volunteers going into state schools to give Christian religious instruction lessons, because we believe these are putting a bias in favour of Christianity. The lessons are biased, and they also split classes in two, to the children who favour Christianity and those who don't. And this causes friction between those two groups of children. The other thing we are concerned about, we want another law change to make the Ministry of Education monitor all teaching about religion in state schools. That's the teaching within the ordinary curriculum. Schools do teach a bit about religion, but they can do it more or less however the local parents think. So they could bias it in favour of Christianity, or they might have nothing about religion at all, or they might look at some religions but just their festivals. I think this is happening quite a bit. Anyway, we want that law changed so that the Ministry of Education will have to monitor schools to see whether they are treating religion in a fair way. All that is still there, and this is still our Plan A. However, there was a fly in the ointment which arrived last month when our legal challenger, the Attorney General, wrote a very unpleasant letter. The Attorney General is a Crown officer who represents the present law, and to reach our goal we have to beat him in court. But in this letter he tried to shrink our case before it gets to court. We have 25 witnesses, a lot of parents, a lot of religious people, a lot of religious experts, and they cover about 20 different issues in our case. The Attorney General said this is making it very hard for him. Would he mind cutting it back from 25 witnesses to just 3? And we are very, very concerned about that, and we would have a great difficulty. It would shut me out for giving evidence for starters, because he said the 3 who should be able to speak were parents who had children in Bible and schools classes. I don't have any children of school age at all. Even my grandchildren, some of them are over 25, 22 years old. So that would shut out my evidence. And it gets worse, because in our Plan A, I'm also producing evidence from a Buddhist and a Jew whose children have had trouble with religion education and have also had discrimination themselves. One of them because she is a lesbian, and her children's school has tutors who believe that she is evil. But the Attorney General doesn't want to speak about them at all. I'm also producing evidence from a religious studies professor, Paul Morris, who has reviewed the Bible in Schools teaching material. But I don't think he has any children in school at present either. So our council are preparing to fight against that. That is to say, we are still fighting for Plan A. But the Attorney General has put another fly in the ointment. He's challenging our right to talk about religion in high schools, because we didn't mention high schools when we first made our complaint in 2014. And he also says the present law doesn't mention high schools, which is true. But we say it should mention high schools because lots of religion is being taught there, and sometimes it's being taught in a biased way. So we're going to have to fight that, and we may well lose it. So that would mean we would be able to talk about primary schools, but not about high schools. And any law change that we won would not cover high schools. So that is really, really bad. And the third fly in the ointment is that we may have to have a procedural court hearing to argue our right to bring this wider evidence into the court. And that would cost thousands of dollars more and take a couple of months more. That really brasses us up, because we've already been waiting for 5 years. But anyway, with all that, I thought we cannot take our success for granted. We need a Plan B. And then I was very pleased to find out that we have a Plan B all ready to go. The guidelines that Tanya and I negotiated about with the Ministry of Education in 2015, they were rejected at that time. It was probably cancelled by the Minister of Education at the time, Hekia Pirata. However, there's been a change of government since then. She is no longer Minister of Education, And the new Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, has some sympathy with our case, and under his lead, the Ministry of Education last September dug our guidelines out of the ministry's too hard basket, got the ministry to brush the dust off them, and they have been published last September, and they are not too bad. They haven't come into effect yet because the ministry wants to consult people, but we took part in that consultation. And so we've been working on Plan B before we actually thought it was Plan B. And so if our case gets lost or if it gets delayed, part of Plan B is pretty well sure to succeed because I don't know when those guidelines are going to come into force, but we are expecting it to be within the next few weeks. They're aiming to get it near the beginning of the school year. So our Plan B is likely to partly succeed. Not entirely, because there are things that the guidelines fail to mention, such as secondary schools, but that would be a very good consolation prize. And I call it our Plan B, even though we're not actually doing very much about it. It's really the Minister of Education thinks it's his Plan B, but in fact, we were the ones who started it. We were the ones who started the negotiation and said there should be guidelines. So that's Plan B. And I'm rather proud of it, even though we would prefer to get Plan A. But amazingly, it dawned on me when I started thinking of this problem, we also have a Plan C, which we cannot take credit for, but this too has been dropped in our lap without us asking. And again, it's because we've got a Labour government. The longer-term plan by the Ministry of Education is to rethink the Tomorrow's Schools legislation that was passed in 1989. The government says this makes schools too competitive, they're competing with each other, and it helps the rich schools and it hurts the others. And they say the schools should not be so independent as they are now. They should be supervised in regional groups, and they would then be able to look after minorities better. Now, there's nothing about religion in this plan at all, but it just suddenly dawned on me that plan, which the minister is, that education law that the minister wants to get rewritten, is the Education Act 1989. And that Education Act 99 is the one that the ministry doesn't want us to talk about. So even if he can prove that we didn't discuss Education Act 1989 4 years ago, doesn't matter. The government is going to discuss it for us. And so we will be able to make submissions that we've already made some submissions about it, and saying, as you start taking some of the authority away from schools, will you please also make sure that these schools are teaching about religion in a way that is fair to everybody. So that is not a big ask. The ministry is already wanting to reduce the power of local bodies to be biased. We just want, it shouldn't be a hard ask to get religion included in that review. So that's rather cool, I think, that if we lose that part of our argument, the government may well do it for us. We will have to ask them to change it a little bit, but it's in the spirit of what they're already doing. Now, there are a couple of other changes that have come up in the last few weeks. Tanya and I have just last week finished a survey of religion in schools. We're going to use those part of our Plan A or B or C, but we've surveyed and found how many schools there are that have religious education. We've also asked how many schools have religious prayers in their assemblies. We've also asked how many of them got, and those things are both mentioned in the government guidelines. So our survey will help those government guidelines. It will show there's a need for what the government is planning to do. It says that schools should not be allowed to, our survey says there are about 60 schools which are hiring Christian youth workers who are actually little more than evangelists. They are supposed to be counselling children who have emotional troubles, but they're also supposed to take them along to local Christian youth clubs as part of their therapy. So we think that is terribly biased, but the the government has included that in its guidelines, and we can't take credit for that. We didn't think of that when we started the guidelines off, but the government has thought of it. It said there should not be these biased youth workers in our schools. So that will be, that's the government. We can't take any credit for that at all, but we have evidence that will help it along its way. So the plan B and C look hopeful signs, but we are still working for plan A. So I chose that subject because I wanted to refer to the way we are having to think plan B. But it came to, as I prepared it, I thought this applies to my own self personally. I and many other religious people tend to be fixated on plan A. We are idealistic people. We want to change society. We have huge dreams for society that are difficult and long-term and that get on our nerves at times because we get into arguments and fights and demonstrations. You could say that we religious people are rather obsessed with our plan A. We want to fix society up and we've got fairly different ideas about how it should be done. And sometimes I think it's helpful to realise that even if we don't succeed in them, there may be a plan B that sounds like more work, but it may actually reduce stress for us to think, well, okay, if we don't, for instance, by going on the Pride March, for instance, we don't succeed in getting the police to stop bullying transgender people, we may still achieve a lot of goodwill in our community. So these other plans may be something we should be considering more. Also, in politics in the last few months, there have been some horrible examples of politicians who are hung up on plan A. Think of Donald Trump with his border wall, his sexism, his denial of climate change, all of them rigid goals, but there are plenty of other politicians, fortunately, who have plan B and are trying to stop him and having some effect. Think of Brexit in Britain and the way the government has become caught up in a huge trap because Theresa May is so one-eyed that she can only think of one plan and can't even adapt it to please Europe or to please other parts and can't get a majority of politicians behind it. The Labour Party in England is no better. It doesn't even seem to have a plan A and just wants to fight Theresa May. If they were able to think of plan B, they might have solved their problems better, might have pleased more people. So there's this religious side to our plans. And I wanted to say that several of the parables of Jesus have a plan A to sound to them. They are about fighting the good fight and working for peace and justice. There are so many of these plans that Jesus had. I'm actually tired just thinking about them all. But this other story we read this morning, I rather like as a change because it's about a plan B. It's about a dishonest manager who's wasting his employer's wealth, constantly wasting his employer's money, probably spending some of it on himself. That was his plan A, but he got caught and was sacked. But he didn't get distressed at all. He thought for a minute and he thought, when I get the sack, I need some other employers who are going to be friendly to me. And so if I can use my employer's money in my last few days to bribe them, they will be happy to employ me and I will have a job after all. So very dishonest. And you wonder why Jesus was actually recommending it. But I think he's not recommending the dishonesty. I think he's recommending the flexibility of people who get realistic and when they can't do what they want to do, think again and come up with something else. In fact, the very idea, a Christian and Jewish idea of repentance, actually repentance means thinking again, and that means thinking of plan B, thinking maybe the things I've been working for I'm not going to get, but if I change my goals, I might get something that really works. There's a wise saying that sums up this difference. It's a prayer. Lord, give me the tranquility to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things which can be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. But I'd say we don't actually get wisdom as quick as we need it. On any given day, you may need more courage, But on the other hand, courage may not be a good idea. Maybe what you need is serenity and to go with the flow. So in either case, even when you don't know what's best, it may help if you have a few plan Bs up your sleeve, your own second choice, other people's ideas that you would have not chosen yourself. They may get you out of your own bind. Plan A always looks best, but you may have to settle for plan B, and that may not be too bad. For my closing words, may love inspire you, wisdom guide you, and peace surround you until we meet again.